Hi, I'm Dustin Connor, professor for this course, and welcome to the first lecture on disciple making and church planting in North America. We are in the missional foundations section of the course, where we are seeking to lay a gospel driven foundation for why we should plant more churches and why we should be involved in making disciples here in a North American context. And so today's lecture is going to seek to answer the question, why plant more churches in North America? Many say, well, there's a church on every corner. Why do we need another? Why don't we just focus on those? Well, aren't there enough Christians here in North America? Shouldn't we focus our efforts on an international scale in other countries where there aren't as many? And these are valid reasons. It's very true. There are many churches here in North America. My church meets in Winston-Salem, and within sight there are three other churches if you step out in the parking lot from our church. And so why do we need more? Why does Winston-Salem, North Carolina need more new churches? Why does New York City or Los Angeles or the small town in Idaho, wherever it may be, why should we plant more churches? Well, I believe we're going to look at some very, very key reasons why we should be focused on planting churches here in North America. I want you to hear a quote from missiologist Peter Wagner. He once wrote, "Planting new churches is the most effective evangelistic methodology known under heaven." Let me say that one more time. Planting new churches is the most effective evangelistic methodology known under heaven. In this class, we want to seek to unpack that a little bit more, to see, is church planting indeed a valid or good or even the best church planting or evangelistic methodology? So let's look at a few ideas. Statistically, new churches have more baptisms than older, more established churches. Statistically, new churches grow at a faster rate. They also can bring new life to a declining or a dying church by either them being involved in planting or merging with a new church. And I also think that is the best strategy for restoring a city or a community with the gospel. I think new churches help the city in ways that it may not quite understand. And so, as we begin, keep those ideas in mind. I am not the one who's going to say that we should stop planting churches overseas and focus just on North America. I think we need a both-and approach, and I think this course and this program will help you understand why. Church planting is not specifically commanded in the Bible, but it is the natural product of the Great Commission to make disciples. Jesus never said, "Go therefore and plant churches." Paul never commissioned young Timothy to go and plant more churches. He said, "Go and preach the word. Go and be faithful." So why in the world would we look at an idea like planting churches? Why would we make this such a strong emphasis? Why should the church be involved in church planting? Well, I think we do have biblical merit for wanting to plant churches or for seeing the need for it. First of all, let's look at the early church in the book of Acts. You see that, first of all, the gospel is preached. People repent and believe. They are baptized into the community of faith. They gather together to learn of their faith from the apostles and elders and study the scriptures together. Then they scatter to live and proclaim the gospel, and they start the cycle over again. Well, notice that in there we go from the gospel is preached, they become believers, but then they start to gather. Sometimes in homes, sometimes in the synagogues, with the elders, by themselves, but there is this gathering aspect. And then later in the book of Acts, you start getting identifiers such as the church in Jerusalem or the church in Antioch. And then as we go through Paul's writings, the church in Corinth, the church in Rome, the church in Galatia. And so somehow this idea of the gospel being proclaimed, new disciples being made, and new churches being started. And so we can see that church planting may not be explicitly commanded in the Bible from Christ or from any other writer to do, but it is the natural outflow of disciple-making efforts. So in this section of the lecture, I want to look at three key questions related to this class and to this program. All right? So these are three questions that will kind of outline our lecture today. First of all, what do we mean by church planting? Okay, the phrase itself. Number two, why a focus on North America? Why is there a need for planting more churches in North America? Is there a valid need? So we're going to say, why focus on North America? The third question we're going to look at is what should motivate us to plant more churches in North America? So those three questions, what do we mean by church planting, why focus on North America, and what should motivate us to plant more churches here in North America will outline our lecture today. So let's look at that first question. What do we mean by church planting? Now, you know the idea of church. We understand that. It's a gathering of Christians in a specific location. We often in ecclesiology talk about the local church and the universal church. So we have a pretty decent grasp of what the word church means. Okay? But why do we throw in planting? Why do we have a metaphor or this phrase of planting a new church? Well, there's two primary metaphors that are used. The first one is more of a botanical type metaphor. We say planting churches. And there's also a human metaphor. We talk about birthing new churches. Okay, so both of those kind of the same idea. Okay, you're planting something new. You're giving birth to something new. And we will use this interchangeably in this course. And so if I say planting a new church and birthing a new church, I'm speaking of the same thing. Because both of them have ideas of this organic nature to the church. There's this growth process. There's a beginning, and there's a maturation. Then there's a reproduction, and sometimes even a death. Some churches do die, but often they can help rebirth a new church. And so both come from the idea of growing churches like you would an apple tree or a human being. The key thing, though, that I want you to know is growing healthy churches that reproduce is the main idea. Now, think of the basic idea of a small tree. It's a little sapling, right? It is supposed to grow to reproduce. A young little apple tree is supposed to grow to reproduce more apples, which then in turn will produce more apple trees. Okay, just like an adult was once a small baby, but then grew to reproduction. Right? So the key phrase in both of these thoughts is reproduction. I want you to note that down. The key phrase in any metaphor is reproduction. Every living thing was designed to reproduce, and churches are no different. A church is a living body. We're the body of Christ. People together, there's this living, organic aspect to the church. So, if that's the case, church is born, it grows, it matures, and then it reproduces. We call this church planting. A healthy church is not the one with the most going on or the most programs or the fastest growing numbers. A healthy church is one that continually reproduces after its kind. Go back to Genesis 1, okay? So, let me say that again. Note this down. This probably will be on a test. A healthy church is one that continually reproduces after its kind. In essence, churches planting churches, planting churches. Okay? So, when we get to the section of this course on the phases of church planting, we'll kind of outline a little bit more the idea of going from birth to reproduction in the church planting cycle. But that'll be a little bit later in this course. In general, we can say that we are starting new churches just like a baby is the start of a new life. These two metaphors help us see the organic and reproductive nature of starting new churches. Now, let me give you a definition of church planting. This is a very simple one that I really like. It comes from missiologist J.D. Payne. He writes that church planting, biblical church planting is, now when I say something like is, I'm giving you a definition. Note this. Biblical church planting is disciple making that results in new churches. Let me say that one more time. Biblical church planting is disciple making that leads or results in new churches. Now, he also said it a little bit differently in his book, that evangelizing leading to congregationalizing. So basically, church planting is missions in action. Now, let me give you a little bit longer definition of church planting, and we will really stretch this definition out throughout the whole program. We'll be looking back at key aspects of this, but I like his fuller, J.D. Payne's fuller definition of church planting. He says, biblical church planting is about using contextualized methods in a strategic manner to reach unbelievers, equip them as church leaders, and send them as disciple makers and church planters throughout the world. Let me say it again and slowly. Biblical church planting is about using contextualized methods in a strategic manner to reach unbelievers, equip them as church leaders, and send them as disciple makers and church planters throughout the world. So, this is the focus of our class. We will go off of this simple definition of church planting as disciple making that results in new churches. Hence the name of this course, Disciple Making and Church Planting. I believe that is a key foundational element to understand as we embark in this Great Commission task. So, let's look now at our second question. Why focus on North America? Why should we plant more churches and even have a minor at Piedmont International University focusing on planting new churches in North America? All right? So, at Piedmont, to give you a little backdrop, we do have a very strong missions program that has focused very well and has sent missionaries all over the world and has an international focus. In that program, you look at some anthropological ideas, you look at cross-cultural communication, you look at what does it mean to plant churches in a country or a village that you have never been to, and you have to go and learn and figure out what the people like, what they do, how they live, their cultural expressions, all these type of things. And then you have to go and you're tasked with starting a new church in this area. Right? Well, North American missions is foundationally the same in a lot of ways of disciple making and church planting, but there are some very, very different ideas and concepts when it comes to planting in a North American context. And largely that comes from the fact that we are kind of approaching it from a North American mindset. And so we saw that it was necessary at Piedmont to have a minor that really focused on those who want to plant in places like Boston or Toronto or Las Vegas or Seattle or Hamlet, North Carolina, where I was born and raised. So, before we answer the question, why focus on North America, I want to first define what we mean by North America. Right? And we'll look at three ways. Jot these down. Geographically. Okay? What do we mean by North America geographically? In this class, we want to be primarily focusing on the United States and Canada. Right? Now, geographically, Mexico is considered part of North America, but in this class, we really believe that Mexico missions to a Mexican context would better be served in our international missions program because of linguistic and cultural differences. So in this class, we're really going to focus on the United States and Canada, similar culture, mostly the same language, and so forth. So, second thing, in helping define what we mean by North America, culturally. All right? Culturally, we're talking about a Western culture characterized by postmodern, pluralistic worldviews, variety of religions and spiritual perspectives, things like capitalism, government is a democracy, consumerism is huge. We are a leader in the world in technology and business and other things like that. And so we're going to really discuss a more Western, postmodern type of mindset that really permeates North America. You can see that we're really kind of getting very much to what Europe has become, a very post-Christian state, and North America is no different. We are rapidly approaching that post-Christian. Most would say we're actually past the post-Christian state. Now, in the third class in this course, the contextualization class, we're really going to dig into North American culture. We're going to study from a variety of angles. We're going to look at even its cultural text, such as movies and music and different things like that, to kind of help us understand the mindset of the people sitting in our pews or those in the community we are trying to reach. So, first of all, geographically, United States and Canada, culturally, a Western cultural mindset, and then lastly, linguistically. Right? In North America, English is the primary language, and so for us studying this class, we're not going to do a lot with language study unless you do focus on an area or a people group that does speak another language. That's the really cool thing that I'm excited about in this class is we will discuss what does it look like to plant churches for international living here in North America. It is said that the United States is this melting pot of all these backgrounds and the number of immigrants coming to America to find jobs and to live. America is becoming an international mission field. And so some of you may go through this class and realize you do need to learn French to go plant a church in Montreal. And that's fantastic. So that really is involved in North American church planting when we're talking about what it means to plant for internationals here in the United States or in Canada. So, Let me throw this question out to you. With North America having the history it has with the Christian religion, why do we need to plant more churches here? Okay, don't we already have enough churches? Aren't there one on every corner, so to speak? Shouldn't we just help strengthen existing churches? Shouldn't that be our focus? Taking churches that are struggling and help them reinvigorate or to be revitalized and remission for gospel productivity. Shouldn't we focus more on that instead of new churches? Well, I've given some reasons before of why we should, I believe, focus on planting in North American context as well. But I want to give you 5 reasons, and I want you to jot each of these down. You'll need to know these. 5 reasons why I believe that North America is a ripe mission field and a place that we should focus on planting churches. First of all, the decrease in cultural influence by the church in North America. Okay, the decrease in cultural influence by the church in North America. There was once a time when a pastor was a well-respected member of the community. There were a time when the church and a church attending a church was a key part of the culture. There was a time when that was the case. Sadly, overall, that is not the case anymore here in North America. Pastors are not the most respected persons. Churches are seem to be rife with disagreements and fights, and the community is watching and looking in, saying, "I don't need that." They're no different from me. They're no different from any other social club I've been a part of. So the church has really lost this ability to speak into culture, to influence the culture in a variety of ways. Now we still have a lot of influence in many spheres and many sectors, but overall we're losing that. Our influence is decreasing, and the influence of other things are increasing. It doesn't help also that Christians, by and large, have fled the cultural scene. Right? We've retreated to our Christian movies, our Christian bookstores, our Christian coffee shops, Christian basketball leagues, and we don't rub shoulders anymore with those who don't know Christ. We're not spending time with lost people anymore. We've created Christian sections for everything so we can escape from culture. And I believe, and we'll, as we go through this program, you'll hear my heart very clearly, I believe that is wrong. I believe we should be rubbing shoulders with lost people. We should be engaging culture. Culture is really the product of what a society puts together. Is what we do, what we make. And as Christians, we should be helping make music. We should be helping make movies. Not just, we have to have them explicitly Christian all the time. Though I think there is a place for those. But we need to make sure that we are engaging the broader secular culture in a way that we haven't been in years. Also, with this decrease in cultural influence, you've had the number of atheists have doubled in the last 2 decades. This has led to a more humanistic thinking that is taught in our schools and influenced our children. Also, a postmodern worldview now dominates dominates over the Christian worldview here in North America, and it's creeped into our churches without us even realizing. And some philosophers are saying we are now entering a postmodern mindset that we really don't know how it's going to affect us. But the church needs to be on the forefront. And I believe planting new churches can help with this. Second reason, an overall increase in population with an overall decrease in number of Christians. Okay? So second reason, overall increase in population while an overall decrease of Christians. Okay? So basically, the United States population has continued to rise. Okay? But the number of churches, the number of Christians, has steadily declined. So as this gap gets wider, we down here are losing our influence in the culture. We are not able to speak. We're no longer we can't call ourselves a Christian nation anymore. The numbers, the population going up, the number of Christians are going down. It is right now believed that the United States, North America, is the 4th or 5th largest mission field on the earth, more than any other country, because of the way that culture has changed, the lack of influence from the church, and because of immigration. The nations are coming to us and they're bringing their religions. Hear this. If the unchurched in North America, those who are not involved in a gospel-centered church, were a nation of its own, it would be the 4th most populated nation on earth with around 280 million people. Now, when you look at statistics and numbers, it's tough to say well, how many Christians are in a nation. Because if you look at the statistics, right now there should be about 75% of North America are Christian. But when you really dig down to what they're meaning, they can say we are Christians by name. That also includes other Christian religions such as Catholicism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, very, very liberal Christians. So when you really get down to the numbers and look at how many are unchurched, they may claim Christianity on the U.S. Census, but in their lives they're not involved in the local church, they're not involved in disciple making. 280 million people would make up we would be the fourth largest nation if we just took those who are unengaged with the gospel, who are not followers of Christ. If that doesn't break your heart, what will? So, also, around 25% of people in the U.S. Would be closer to reality of those we would consider Protestant evangelical Christians. Okay, so really about 25% even get close to what we would consider a Christian. But let's really take an honest look. Look at your church. Can you really say that all the people in your church will make up this 25%? Would you really be willing to say that all the people in your church, or even half, or even 20%, are actively engaged in multiplying disciples of Jesus Christ evangelistically? If so, your church would be growing. There would be no doubt. But largely our churches are not growing because the majority of our people in our churches are not participating in the Great Commission. So, missiologists have said that when an area gets below 10% Christian, that outside help is needed. And sadly, there are many pockets in North America, and we're going to look at those in just a second, that are far below that 10% number. Now, there are some areas, especially in the South and Southeast, even in my own state, where those numbers, we are not at the 10% level. We're closer to the 25 to 30% of Christians. But we're battling a whole other issue, such as calling yourself a Christian but not really living it out, this idea of a cultural Christian and not a true biblical Christian. So many of our major cities are below this 10% line, therefore needing some help. I think some of you may even need to go to some of our more unreached cities like New York City, Boston, Toronto, Seattle, Salt Lake, Montreal, Washington, D.C., or maybe even go to some of our more unreached states or territories like Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Oregon, Utah, and Quebec. All right? So let me give you a third reason now. A third reason for why we need more churches in North America. Increase in internationals. Right? In the last, I think go back to the whole history of North America, the whole history of the U.S., we are a nation of immigrants. We came over, our forefathers all came over as immigrants. They were all internationals at some point. But now we have an increase of internationals from many different countries who are coming to North America. So with an increase in internationals, you have an increase in other religions coming as well. The nations are coming to us, and we have to respond in ways that are gospel-driven to help plant new churches for these, especially if there are linguistic and cultural barriers that we need to overcome and think through. It is said that Toronto, in Ontario, Canada, is the most ethnically diverse city in North America and one of the top ethnically diverse cities in the world. That's here in North America. That is here in our backyard. So we need to see churches planted that really do address and seek to help these various ethnic minorities. I had a friend I went to seminary with who we did the same missiology program at school, and on the day of graduation we were talking about future plans and what's going to happen next, and his lifelong ambition was to go to the country of Tibet to plant churches. Well, it turns out for various reasons they were not able to go to Tibet because of some health issues, but he did marry a woman who was a missionary to Tibet. They met at school, which was providence, I would say. And they were thinking of they would be going back to Tibet, finding out they couldn't go. They instead are becoming church planting missionaries to New York City to plant churches among the Tibetan people of New York City. So he's a North American church planter, but he's planting for Tibetan people. Those kind of opportunities are everywhere, whether it's for Spanish speakers or Saudi Arabian, Karenni, Chinese, all those nationalities. You may not plant an English-speaking church, and that would be great. That would be phenomenal. But you may be doing it here in a North American context. Let me give you a fourth reason why I think we need to plant more churches in North America. The increase of nuns, right? Increase of nuns. Now, this is not nuns like we think of Catholic women with the whole black garb on. N-O-N-E-S, the religiously unaffiliated. Right? Those who on the U.S. Census check off no religion, no religious preference. Right? This number is rapidly growing. There are more atheists, more agnostics who fit these numbers, and a millennial generation, those who are about under the age of around 30, 34 and under, had the highest percentage of the nuns. And these are who are going to be leading our churches in the next 20, 30 years. And so the highest percentage of nuns are in the millennial generation, and they're growing like crazy. Right now, the percentage of U.S. population of those professing to be Christian, which can loosely include Catholic, has gone down 5% in the last 5 years. Okay, so those calling themselves Christians, not necessarily they're active in disciple making, just broadly speaking, that they put on the census, the percentage of Christians in the United States gone down 5%, when the number of the nuns, the religiously unaffiliated, has gone up by 5%. So if this trend continues, then the nuns or the religiously unaffiliated will outnumber the Christians by the year 2040. That's 25 years from now. I will be 52 years old at the time this happens, when the percentage and numbers of nuns overtake that of Christians, if this trend continues. That's why we need to plant more churches, so we can influence not just our own culture, but the globe as well. The city where I live in, Winston-Salem, statistically has about 25% of the people living here in our area where our Piedmont is located, about 25% said on the census sheet that they are religiously unaffiliated or a nun. City of Boston, 75%. Okay, this is North America. Anywhere from 25 to 75%, depending on where you are and which city, which area, are religiously unaffiliated. This is why we need to plant more churches. Fifth reason, statistics on lostness in North America. Right? I am not a statistician. I don't claim to be. But I have trusted the research of several very well-known North American missiologists. We will highlight and discuss several of those, and we actually be using their books. But the fifth reason why I think we need to plant more churches in North America is simply the statistics on lostness, those who don't know Christ in North America. Let me give you a breakdown of some of the numbers and see how this, really, for me, it breaks my heart. I want you to hear these numbers. In the Northeast, right, the area of New York and Maine, Vermont, that area, 82% lost. 82% lost. 6% are affiliated with an evangelical church. An evangelical church, one that proclaims the gospel. 6% of the Northeast will say that they are part of an evangelical church, making the Northeast the most unreached area in North America, with 94% not really engaged in an evangelical church. They may be involved in some other churches, or maybe a liberal church or something like that, but 94% are not involved in an evangelical church. City of Boston, 2.5% evangelical. 2.5% evangelical. Remember that 10% line we talked about earlier? Very far below that. It's also the area where 75% in Boston claim no religious affiliation. Think about the city of Boston. Over 100 colleges and universities. It's where the world is coming to learn, so to speak. Harvard, MIT, Boston University, several, 100-something more other colleges and universities. Highly, highly influential town. It was one of the first church-planting churches in Boston, actually in the area of Roxborough, was started. That sent out missionaries to the Indians and down to Pennsylvania, and eventually made their way down here to North Carolina and planted Baptist churches years and years ago. It all started in Boston. Now it's flipped. We need to go back to Boston. Okay. New York City, 22 million people there close and living in proximity of New York City, over 800 languages, and 94% do not know Jesus Christ. 94%. In 2010, Forbes magazine named New York City the city with the largest global impact and influence in the world. Should we not plant more churches here to impact the nations? It has a global influence. We need more churches in New York City. How about Portland, Maine? 3.5% evangelical Christian. How about we look at the state of Vermont as a whole? Only around 1 to 2% Protestant evangelical Christian. 1 to 2%. Saudi Arabia has the same percentage of Christians as Vermont. All right? Connecticut, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, all average between 95 and 98% lost. So the Northeast, one of the biggest mission fields as far as percentages are concerned, are 10, 12-hour drive from where I'm sitting right now recording this lecture. Let's look at Canada next. Canada, we are definitely considering Canada part of North America. Think of Toronto, Ontario. It is the most ethnically diverse city on earth, one of the most ethnically diverse city on earth, topping Miami, Los Angeles, and New York City. Of its almost 6 million people, nearly half, 2.3 million, are foreign-born. And of all these numbers in Toronto, out of the 6 million people and the almost half that are foreign-born, 97% are without Jesus Christ. 97% do not know Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Out of every 100 people walking down the streets in Toronto, maybe 3 know Jesus personally. We need to plant churches in Toronto. Here's one that really tugs at my heart. Montreal is in the territory of Quebec, and Montreal is very close to Syracuse, New York. Actually, the majority of the Canadian population lives within a 2 to 3 hour drive of the United States border. So Toronto and Montreal and some of those other large Canadian cities are very close to the United States line. So culturally, very, very similar, a lot of interaction. Montreal, Quebec, less than 0.7% evangelical Christian, the same as Pakistan. Hear that again. Montreal, Quebec, less than 0.7% evangelical Christian, about the same as in Pakistan. The territory of Quebec as a whole is around 0.5%, not 5%, 0.5% evangelical Christian. The Quebecois, who are the French-speaking Canadians living in Quebec, make up the most unreached people group in North America. I met some church planting friends who are planters in Quebec City, and they were telling me about the need. And they walk out and they can talk to 100 people a day, and maybe one knows Jesus Christ. We need to plant more churches in Montreal. Let's look at the West. Los Angeles, Hollywood, about 9.6% evangelical Christian, almost at that 10%, but still under it. We need to plant more churches in Los Angeles. Hollywood is shaping our younger generation, is shaping us. Portland, Oregon. It's one of the most postmodern and post-Christian cities in North America, and it's around 11% or so evangelical Christian. 11%. Oh, that's getting better, but still, one that is such a center for cultural influence, such as Portland. We need more churches there. Salt Lake City, Utah, 97% lost, only 3% know Christ. Salt Lake City, Utah is very near Mormon country, Mormon territory, which Mormons we would not believe are evangelical Christian. Provo, Utah, which is very close to Salt Lake, 0.6% evangelical Christian. Right? Now, the majority of people there, of course, are Mormon, so we need to plant churches for Mormon people in Provo or Salt Lake City, Utah. Let's look at the Midwest. Minneapolis, St. Paul area, 87% lost. Indianapolis has 67% who are the nuns or unaffiliated with any religion, and around 18% who will call themselves evangelical. Let's look at the South, where we are now. The South is often called the Bible Belt. Right? It seems like there's churches all over the place, and there really are, and the numbers are definitely far different from the Northeast and Canada when it comes to the South. But I believe there's still a huge need for planting new churches in the South because the majority of our churches are in decline or dying. They're losing influence in the community. We have brick buildings with steeples all over the place, but very little gospel presence. Right? The Bible Belt is in essence loosening. Right? Let's look at our city where Piedmont is located, Winston-Salem. 25% are religiously unaffiliated. We have many, many churches, but as the numbers of churches are increasing here in Winston-Salem, the population is exponentially increasing, and we can't keep up. So my church, 121 Church here in Winston-Salem, is committed to planting more churches and helping more new churches get started, as well as helping established churches reinvigorate and be remission for gospel ministry as well. We also want to think of the religiously lost who are sitting in our pews, those who think they know Christ but they really don't. The South is full of those. So we need to plant churches that focus on the gospel, that get the members and the people sitting in those pews actively engaged in making disciples for Jesus Christ. Remember, if we make disciples, that will lead to new churches started. The North American Mission Board, which is part of the Southern Baptist Convention, is a part of a group that I am affiliated with. They have a focus on major cities. They picked the 32 they would consider the most strategic cities in North America to focus on. I encourage you to look at namb.org and look at some of the cities and the profiles and the demographics and the stories of the church planters who are there. It's an amazing study in sociology and even anthropology, and this shift of people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. And so North American Mission Board is focusing on helping plant churches there. Many other mission agencies that Piedmont affiliates with, such as ABWE and some others, are really focused on helping plant more churches in these influential centers and then disseminate church planting from those areas. But I believe that we need a holistic approach to planting churches in North America, one that includes both planting in the large cities, but also in the small towns like where I grew up, where there was a church on every corner and everybody's a Christian, but no one's living like it. We need new churches there as well. Now, let's look at the third part of today's lecture, the third question. What should motivate us to plant more churches here in North America? Okay, what should motivate us to plant more churches here in North America? I want to give four reasons that I believe we should be motivated to plant more churches. First of all, the statistics of lostness. We just looked through all those numbers where there are places in the Northeast that are 1 to 2, 3% evangelical Christian. I believe those numbers should motivate us. They should get us thinking of what's the percentage in our area. Here, where Piedmont is located, we have through some statistical working in partnership with a state convention that does a lot of statistical data for missions related ideas. They have concluded that the area where Piedmont is located, there are about 70% who really are engaged with the local church. Okay, about 70% of people are not engaged actively in the local church within a mile and a half of Piedmont's campus in Winston-Salem. 70%. That's not as bad as 97%, like in Boston or Maine, but that is significant. That is 70 out of 100 people not knowing Jesus, not having the life that the gospel brings. So we want to plant more churches even here in our area near Piedmont. So I'm reminded when I look at the statistics and the numbers of Jesus telling his disciples to pray for more laborers in the harvest because they were ripe. And I think our many of our areas and cities and states in North America are ripe and ready for you and I to go and make disciples and plant churches. A second reason that we should be motivated to plant more churches, I believe, is a desire to see the gospel flourish in your city. I believe that the gospel is the best thing for a person, and it's the best thing for a community. Okay, so another reason to be motivated is your desire to see the gospel flourish in your city. What if we had a glimpse of the new heaven, new earth being seen in our city as it is being renewed in the gospel, where lives and families are being changed, children are no longer hungry, these social ills of sex trafficking and narcotics abuse and crime and lack of education for children. What if we saw those turn because we had more churches that were focused on the community and reaching people with the gospel? Okay, now we do not believe in a purely social gospel where we do good acts and do not proclaim the gospel. We believe in both a word and deed. We believe that proclaim the gospel and live in the gospel must go hand in hand as we engage our city. So the second motivation, a desire to see the gospel flourish in your city. Third motivation, the health of sister churches. I think that's a little bit odd. Why would the health of another church? I mean, what if their church is not doing it quite as well? Why should I care about the health of that church? We're in it together. That's why. A big portion of this program, and especially in our second class, we talk a lot about collaboration, networking. It's going to take more than one church to reach a city. We're going to have to work together. We're going to have to stop thinking of being jealous when church members come from our church to the church down the street. We need to work together with the church down the street, especially if there's 70%, 80%, 95% people in our community who don't know Christ. It's going to take all of us working together, each local church in the area working together to bring the gospel. Our motivation should not be because all of the churches are bad or boring. Okay, this was my thinking. When I was an undergrad student here at Piedmont, I wanted to go plant a church because the church I was at was boring. The churches weren't getting the job done. They were lame and they weren't cool enough, and none of my friends would want to go there. That was my original motivation. Sinful as all get out. Okay, that is a sinful, wrong reason for wanting to plant a church. It should be that I want to see my sister churches and those churches in our area flourishing themselves. I want to see First and Second Baptist Church and Calvary Baptist Church and Mount Olive Baptist Church and the church at Forest. I want to see all these churches growing because it means that lost people come to know Christ. And I want to help them. Whether I'm in a new church, an established church, whichever, we should want to help them. So I believe a third motivation is the health of our sister churches. Many struggling churches can be reinvigorated by helping plant in whatever capacity. Here in our area, we recently had a local church that was declining. They could not figure out the best way to really engage their area. And so they invited a young church that was only about 2 years old to plant a second campus in their church, and they merged, and they gave them the building completely free. So they have this property that they can use for gospel mission. They have a place to meet. They have education space, all this stemming from a church that said, you know what, we're going to die to help give life to this new church. And so I was actually part of this church for about 1.5 years as I was helping them get started. It was a beautiful thing as we came from the downtown campus and moved to this very rural area in Winston-Salem and helped them get started. So here I am in my mid-20s worshiping alongside Miss Melba, who was 83 years old and part of that original church. She had been a member of that church that had merged and given the property for over 60 years. And our church was still going because they merged with an existing church. And now their church is growing like crazy and having a gospel impact on lost people on that side of town. Okay, so church planting can help strengthen and bring new life and health to established churches. Lastly, a fourth motivation. What if we're motivated by how your life has been radically restored by Jesus? Shouldn't that be our motivation for all of our gospel endeavors? How our life, my life, your life, has been radically restored by Jesus, and we want others to know the same message as well. We want others to know that they can be restored by Jesus Christ and His love as well. A heart for the gospel should motivate us, above all else, to plant more churches, to make disciples, and to see our cities flourishing because of the gospel. Your salvation and your sanctification bring glory to Jesus Christ. So does the salvation and sanctification of those who do not yet know Jesus right now. Okay? Let's glorify Jesus together by making disciples and planting new churches. So hopefully I have convinced you at least that there is some valid reasons that why we should plant churches in North America. Now remember, this is not to take away the fact that we need to plant churches internationally. We cannot ignore that. But we also cannot ignore the lost who are in our own neighborhoods while we are living here. We can't ignore the millions of internationals who find homes and jobs in our towns. We cannot ignore them. I believe that North America is poised to really influence the world through the gospel, through mobilizing those in our church to reach their city and the nation with the gospel. So, as we think through why plant more churches in North America? Well, we talked about church planting, this organic nature, and it's for the goal of reproducing disciples. Then we looked at what we meant by North America, both geographically, culturally, and even linguistically. Then we looked at the reasons why I think we should plant churches, the 5 reasons. The numbers of losses, the increase in population, the decrease in Christian, the rise in nuns and other worldviews, the statistics that we went through that are very sobering. They should instill in us a desire to want to plant more churches here in North America. And then lastly, what should motivate us to plant churches? It cannot be for selfish reasons. It cannot be because you think you can do it better than the next guy. You can't. All right? Jesus commanded and commissioned his disciples to, as they were going out into the world, to make disciples by baptizing, teaching them to obey, and remembering that he is always with them. So as we conclude this lecture, keep that in mind. The Great Commission involves you. It involves you and I. It involves us in a disciple-making effort to see our cities restored in the gospel, to see lives changed, to families mended, reconciliation brought. That is our motivation. That is why we want to plant churches. So, I hope you have taken to heart and have seen a little bit of my heart for why we should plant churches here in North America. And as we go through this class, you might need to wrestle with some things. There will be some times where I will bring out some concepts and ideas that are a little bit different. They may not be what you've heard all your life. I grew up and I never heard the idea of church planting and never understood it. I also never understood disciple making. But as I have been saturated in the gospel and have read scripture and have seen the heart for Jesus for the lost, it has compelled me to want to be a part of making disciples and planting churches wherever God has me, whether it's here in North America or even overseas, in another context. Wherever we are, be part of God's great commission and bring glory to Him.